From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Hi everyone, welcome. I'm Mark Nation. I'm Chief of the Rare Book and Special Collections Division here at the Library of Congress. We didn't get a chance to put out the booth to collect the $50 ticket fee, so we're locking the door now, and we'll be collecting on the way out. Anyway, it's lovely always to have another gathering for the Rare Book Forum here at the Library of Congress, and it's particularly lovely today to see so many of our friends and colleagues from across the street. For those of you who don't live in this neighborhood, I don't think the world quite realizes the concentration of really fabulous book people within a block of each other. It's really lovely when we have an opportunity for all of us to get together and share this moment. We've been doing these for quite a while, and I'm very pleased to see that you're remaining loyal to them as we continue to work to do this. Today we're going to be hearing from Daniel DeSimone, who's the Lessing J. Rosenwald curator here in the Rare Book and Special Collections Division. Dan's been here since 1999, 2000. It just seems like he's been here since 1999. And has been working on a variety of projects. For the last few years, in part with his work involving the Rosenwald Collection, which is a history of the illustrated book, a collection that documents that. He's begun to confront more and more the question of color printing as he's acquired books to supplement the collection and to deal with the books that are found in that collection, until he finally came around to sitting down and doing some good hard work on that. He recently gave a talk along a similar topic at Oak Knoll just a while ago, and thought it would be a good chance for all of us to get together to look at books and discuss some of these issues. A couple of things. This is the first in a series of talks that we'll be doing here in the Rare Book Forum that apply to the actual making and construction of books, leading up to a conference that we'll be hosting as a division in December on authenticity. So what we're doing is beginning to look at those aspects of the book. They're both telling and can also be manipulated or confusing, leading up to a much larger conference. Dan will touch on this a little bit towards the end of his talk as well. As a reminder, there are books on the table for you to look at after the talk. As another reminder, we'll be happy to show you anything you'd like to see. It's very crowded in here, so those of you who are leaning and those of you who are sitting behind the books, just remember those are books between the two of you, and just Dan can be captivating, and we don't want you leaning forward into our Blakes. As one should, of course, lean forward into Blakes. And with all of that, I'm very pleased to introduce Dan DeSimone.
Thank you very much. It's always a great rush to be able to get to the point where I'm actually able to talk about some of the work that we've been doing here. The idea of color printing is really in the atmosphere. There's been a program that took place in Oxford last year. There's going to be a book coming out on it. But the reason I got involved with it is because of the acquisitions we've been making here at the library. One of the things about the Rosenwald collections, one of its strengths has been the early printed book. But in the 18th century, Lessing Rosenwald wasn't so interested in collecting illustrated books. And so we began 5 or 8 years ago looking for illustrated books, 18th century illustrated books, and specifically dealing with color, either through the application by hand or through the printing process. So we, through that decision, it forced us to really look back at the holdings of the Rosenwald collection and the library as a whole to try and better understand sort of the historical progression of the illustrated book. So we're going to run through about 3 centuries in the next 45 minutes to an hour. So some of the information could be a little vague, but nonetheless we're going to try and hit on the most important copies that we have in our library, I've also cheated a little bit and taken a few images from the Rosenwald Collection at the National Gallery because of our very close relationship and the amount of work we've been doing together on a number of projects. So I've cheated there. And other examples that come from our collection, I think I've used 1 or 2 images of the chiaroscuro printing from outside our 2 institutions, but that's because we don't have any actually. It's one of all the chiaroscuro material went to the National Gallery. But we'll still talk about it. So I would like to begin today with a book that I always like to begin with. And although this is not color printed, it's a block book. And it's an illustration. This is a book that was printed in 1465 or 1470. And it's actually, the text and the image were printed at the same time on the left, and then or on the right, excuse me, and then the image is colored by hand. But because block books are so rare and because our collection is so strong in block book printing, I like to start with that just to tease you a little bit. It's such an important part of the early printing process. And this is a really exceptional example. To begin, though, Gutenberg's we choose the date 1455 for Gutenberg. By 1457, they're already trying to print in color. And this is an edition of the Psalter that was printed by Fust and Schaefer in 1457. And you can see, I just wanted to show you the whole layout of the page, but then you can see this large letter B here that's in the lower left of the page. What they're trying to do is they're obviously attempting to mimic the manuscript tradition. But because these printers are so fascinated with this technology which they're developing, now this is really early on, 1457, that they're dealing with how do we, through the printing process, through the technology, how do we try and do some of the things that are traditionally part of the manuscript tradition. And so they were trying to print this letter form in through the printing process. What I want you to see here is you have 2 parts to this letter form. You have the filigree, the red, which surrounds the letter B and is central to the letter B, and then you have the letter B. What this is actually it's a piece of metal that has been designed and cut to create that image, and it's in 2 parts. You have the red part and you have the blue part. The blue part actually fits into a hollow. This is what we think. We don't have an example of it, but this is what we think. That it fits into a hollow in the metal plate, and they're inked separately, but then they're tied into the form of the printing of the page. They're tied into the form, and they're inked separately and then printed all at once. So it's an attempt to recreate this image. It's a complicated process, and I think they're in this edition of the Psalter. There are 2 examples of these. The rest are rubricated, so the rest are done by hand. But this was an attempt, the first attempt to try and do it, to create that process. Now, this is from 1459, 2 years later, same printers, Fust and Schaefer. This is De Rationale Divinorum. It's really a book about the rituals of the church, about the sacraments of the Catholic Church, talks about sort of the structure of the church itself. This is a very interesting book because there was over 50 editions printed between 1459 and 1500, and it's a very large book. And it was very important to the printing trade to have an opportunity to print a large book of this nature and move it into the marketplace. But what they're doing here again is they're creating this. This is what we call a 13-line initial letter, and it's a 13-line letter because you count from the bottom line here and you count up, and that's 13 lines. And this is sort of just an indicator of size. You can see pretty clearly here the 2 components of this metal letter. You've got the blue and you've got the red. So that, again, you've got this two-part piece where the filigree and the design that runs down the side of the page is part, and then you have the initial letter. What's interesting about this, and what I want you to take a look at, is look at the quality of the red. There's almost a uniformity of that red. It's almost like there's a film that is the color. If you remember back a couple images, and you look at the way the application of color here, the color is much different. You can see the brush marks. You can see that there's more ink or more color applied in certain areas. So it's a different result. But the quality of the red in this image is just superb. And this is, from my point of view, this is the most important initial letter that's ever been printed. And it's just so well done and so well executed that and it's really part of the lore of the early history of printing. Now this is from the Biblia Latina from 1462. Again, I wanted to show you the layout here. But what's happening is that the process is becoming so complicated. For instance, in the book that we just looked at, there are 9 initial letters, 6 of which were printed in the two-part form that we talked about. And then at the end of the book, the printers decided to rubricate. It just was such a complicated process and such an expensive process that by the time 1462 gets around and we get to the Bible, which is, again, a very, very large publication, I think this 1462 is the 4th Bible printed, you have the letter forms, which are throughout this, are done in 3 different styles. The one style, the one on your right, is in red and blue. Okay, so it's a 2-part printed metal letter printed in red and blue. The large D is actually, there's 3 aspects of this. So you have the red, the blue, and then you have this sort of blue-gray, which is also printed in the into the center of this image. But as you go through the book, there's fewer and fewer examples of these complicated forms. And there's actually a 3rd form that goes from the red, the blue, and the blue-gray, and then the red, the blue, and the impression of this center blue-gray area, which is then colored by hand. So, and this is very complicated analysis. It's being done by bibliographers studying this early printing process. And by the end of the book, it's all rubricated. 1462 really is the end of this process. It was so complicated and so difficult to execute and so expensive and time-consuming that really they went and first in Schaefer and most all other printers went back to the process of rubricating their books by hand until they started printing just red line but they didn't. They sort of stopped this complicated color printed process. As we move along in these early years of printing, we're now here at 1485. We come across a printer by the name of Erhard Rathold. Rathold was from Augsburg. 1476, he moved to Venice, created some of the most important books printed in Venice, the Calendarium, where he created the first modern title page that had a beautiful border work, printed border work along the side. He did the Euclid in 1482, which had the diagrams, Euclidean diagrams in the margins, which became the standard form of printing Euclid for centuries. And then by 1485, Rathold is beginning to work with this color printing process. In the past, everything, he would do these small, beautifully produced books, but they were always hand-colored. But he's now experimenting with color printing. And this is a process where on your left side, you can see that there are 3 colors there. So this is actually printed from 3 wood blocks. you have the black, you have then the red, and then you have the brown. And you can see by looking at the quality of the color, the quality of the ink or the color that is applied there, it's very uniform. So it gives you an idea that this is not a colored book. And you can also see there's registration issues. If you look up at the top here, sorry, you can see these where the white froze through. And the whole idea of registration is the major problem that printers are facing as they attempt to make these multiple block printing processes work. And so what we're talking about is that the printer has to be able to align the paper in such a way and be able to ensure that the block that's tied into the press, which is locked into the press, and the paper, he can repeat that because these colors are not applied at the same time. They're actually different blocks and different printings through the paper. So there's a whole series of maneuvers that a printer has to go through in order to make this registration work. The next example is 1489, and you can see the image on your right. It's a two-color image, but again, take a look at the quality of the color and how the evenness of the color has been applied, and then the black sort of key block, as we would call it, or line block, which defines the image. So what you've got here is in a woodcut. Think of a woodcut, and you think of the first block, and he's cut out these circular lines, and everything else is cut away, and you've got the circular lines there, and that prints in black. And then in order to do the bands, he cuts everything away, but he cuts on the block these bands, these little widths that go around, and then they carry color. So that when it's printed, you carry the color of the band, and that color prints, and it's got to be registered perfectly. But it's that kind of a simple understanding of what they were trying to accomplish, but the difficulties were enormous and took enormous time to overcome. I want to stay with Rathold. These are examples of Rathold's after he had returned from Venice to Augsburg. He went home, set up his press again, and he was working with an artist by the name of Hans Bergmeyer. And so you can see now that with the artist working with the printer, that there's a whole new approach, whole new composition that the printers are dealing with. And this is a complicated woodcut image. It has the three saints there. And then he's got to figure out how do we apply the four colors that are in this plate. Now I want you to see the colors here. You've got the red, you've got this sort of ochre here, you've got the brown, and you've got the black. So this is a multi-block printing process, and it's a multi-block, multi-colored process. So you can see the progress that Rathold has made. Now he's working with an artist, and his compositions are becoming more complicated. This is another great one. You know, this is a canon cut printed on vellum. Canon cut is a part of the missal that's used by the Catholic Church, and this is at the canon of the Mass. And you'll find every missal that you ever pick up, especially the older ones, will always have a canon cut of the crucifixion. So in this case, you can see the blue, we think, or at least the scholars who are looking at this may be applied, but the colors here that are through the printing process. And that's Rathold's printer's mark. So I wanted to just show you that because he had an enormous impact on the whole printing trade. (1511), we're moving forward. We're still in Germany. This is Strasbourg. Johann Schott is the printer. And what I want you to focus on here is you can see the text, the title page, but you can see that there's this decorative border, which has got black, it's got red, and it's got some white. Now, the way that this was done was that the contour lines of the black, the contour lines, were cut into a block. A second block was done where there was instead of making contour lines in it, which would define the image, they were making flecks. They were removing small pieces out of the wood block. Because when you ink that block, those depressed areas don't print, right? So what happens actually is the color of the paper comes through. So the paper actually acts as almost a third color. Okay, so this is another sort of advancement that's taking place within this process of trying to understand how to make these color printed woodcuts works of art. This is another example of Schatz printing. This is in the 1513 Ptolemy Atlas. Again, this is a map of Lorraine. The mountains are in brown, and then there's a combination of colors which make up the coats of arms for the various burghers who were living in that area. And this is the same map, which has got the application of printed color and then hand coloring in order to highlight it. So I just wanted to show you the two. They're both from one's from this is from the Thatcher collection, and this is from the Rosenwald collection. But you can see how this combination of color, the application of color, enhanced this image tremendously. And this I wanted to show you because it's Spain, and Spain very rarely gets much respect, I guess. Because there's so few early printed books from Spain that have survived. Of all the major European countries, early Spanish books are very difficult to find, especially illustrated ones. But this is a 5-color printed block. Christ is in the center. He's nailed to a tree. The tree is almost like a genealogy. It's all the saints and the church fathers are in the end. But you can see the registration issue here, right at this area here, where the red is. And then there's a red, there's a brown, there's a lighter brown up here, there's a blue, there's a green. So it's many, many colors. This is a print that is found both hand-colored and color printed. So there's always a discussion about whether a copy that you have is colored or not. There's only 2 complete known books that have survived. The print has survived in its individual form, but this is one here at the library, and then there's one copy at Harvard. And then this is just, I like this, so I'm showing it. Now I'm stepping on thin ice here because this is a very another avenue for as artists and printers were developing their skills, this is sort of the beginning of the chiaroscuro printing. And I think some of you have had the opportunity to listen to Linda Morenas give her presentation, which was so important. And I know that this is a subject which is also in the air. There's a lot of people that are doing work on it. So I'm going to take my time going through this. It's not something I am a specialist in, but I think I know enough to be able to explain what's going on here. So what's happening now, you can see again, this is Augsburg. Ring a bell with Rathold. So you've got Lucas Cranach working in Augsburg. And what Cranach is doing is he's taking a process of drawing and he's attempting to do color printing to replicate the drawing process. So what artists were doing at the time is artists were coloring paper. They would color their paper, they would make rubbings, they would rub some of the areas out, and then they would do a drawing on it. And as you apply color to the paper, you can see that there is a little dark, here's a little lighter, here's a little darker. You create, this sort of gradation of tone, depth of tone, through the application of coloring your paper. And so what Cranach did is that he applied this to the printing process. So he creates he colors a paper, he colors it blue, and then in certain areas he wipes the blue away, so it gives you some tone coming through the paper. And then he cuts a block, prints a block in black, so that all the dark, the contour lines are deeply printed in black. And then for his second block, he puts an adhesive. He cuts the block, puts an adhesive on those raised, those relief areas, and he prints an adhesive on the paper. And then he applies gold fleck. I think it's called, is it a fleck print, Peter?
Well, there is no real word for this yet because he's inventing it. It's not that. It's not a flock print, is what you're thinking.
Oh, flock print, right. So, but it's one color is printed, then there's an adhesive put on it, and then there's a gold leaf and silver is applied and sticks to the adhesive to create this unbelievable image. And I don't know, 1 or 2 copies of this have survived. It's extremely rare, and it's extremely beautiful. Following him is our friend Burgmeier. Now, Burgmeier came out of Rathold's print house, so he's taking a little different approach. So what he does here is he prints, he colors his paper. So he prepares his paper with this tone. He prints, the second is the second block. He prints, instead of using the gold metal, he creates gold and silver ink. So he's made this step forward. It's much more economical to be able to do it this way. So he creates this ink, prints the ink, and then the block which goes over it is the contour block, the block that prints the black outline. So again, we see this movement forward, where necessity perhaps had demanded that the printer deal with the expense of doing a print similar to Burgmeier, to Cranach, to be able to do it in a more economical manner. But it's really beautifully rendered. Another movement in the chiaroscuro printing process is Ugo de Carpi. And de Carpi is now, we're getting to a more sophisticated presentation here. What we're really talking about here is this whole image is a series of varying tones, from light to dark. Light block, a medium block, a dark block, and then a black block. So he's creating his image, again, by allowing in some areas the white paper to come through to give the image some strength. And then he's applying multi-blocks with different intensities of ink to be able to create his image. And then his final block is black. So this is, and that's a very beautifully rendered scene of Simon and the Pharisees. And you can see how the tone, almost it's mimicking a drawing here. And this is what these printers are attempting to do through the technical process. This is Becca Fumie. So this is one of the great Italian artists of the first half of the 16th century. A very powerful presentation. Again, various blocks with various depths of ink, so the tone changes, and you can see that he's defining this image. He's creating this image through the use of tone. There's great depth. There's a perspective that comes with the various colors that he's applied here. And you can see he uses the color of the paper to highlight certain parts of the image. And this is one of the, we just skipped 100 years, but This is a drawing by Guido Rainy, and then it's printed by Bartolomeo Coriolano. And the reason I wanted to show you this is because this is really just, it's a two-block process here. The first block, he prints, he flecks the block so that you have the white coming through to be able to show emphasis and to show physicality. And so that the block is actually, there's no image on it, it's just the images, it's the plain tone. And then it's followed by the block, the line block, where the image is captured. And it's a very sentimental image, but it shows the ability of the block cutter to capture the essence, really, of what the artist is attempting in his drawing. And it's a really fine example. So, so what we've gone through now, over from 1457 until now about 1630, we've really exhausted the attempts of printers to use the woodblock medium for color printing until the 19th century. But they had really worked their way through, changing all the time, making adjustments in order to attempt to either replicate a drawing or to create a very colorful presentation that is so much a part of what we see in the books that we're, I mean, even today. I mean, color is such an important aspect. So I want to, at this time, this is 1572. This is one of the first books that talks about color. This is Alhassani. It's printed in 1572, but it's a 12th century, based on a 12th century manuscript in Arabic. And what he actually is focusing on here is he's focusing on perception. But it's one of the earliest representations of the eye and how the eye works. And in his text, he's talking about color, and he's talking about light, and he's talking about color as an aspect of light. Now, he doesn't come up with a grand theme, as we'll find with what Newton came up with, but nonetheless, they're really trying to understand the nature of color and the perception of color. And this is just a book that's in our collection, and we have many, many books. The reason I'm using this is it's a text volume, but nonetheless, it's important to understand the scope of the collections here, that we can manage to have texts of this nature. This is 1704 when Newton's Optics was published, but Newton was actually working on this subject in the 1680s, but he published a paper on it, and the president of the Royal Society didn't like it, and so he decided not to pursue this subject until after Richard Hooker died, which was in 1703, and then he came out immediately with his book. And I'm not a physicist, but I know that what Newton was able to do with this book is he was able to define the spectrum of color, and that there are three: there's blue, red, and there's yellow, are the basic primary colors. And so this idea, which was published in 1704, was picked up by printers, and I'll come back to that, but I got these out of order somehow. But I'll come back to Newton. This is Johannes Tyler. He's a Dutchman living in Rotterdam. He was a draftsman, and he was a printer and a mechanic. And he produced this color printing process. Now, what's different about this, as opposed to what we've seen in the past, is we're no longer working on wood here. The matrix for this is, the matrices for this is metal. So we're moving from relief, the relief printing, and we're now dealing with the intaglio process of a metal cut. And what Tyler does here is Tyler uses 3 or 4 colors, but he makes his design, and then he colors, puts the color red, he puts the color brown, he puts the color green on the single plate. and then it goes through the press in one run, and you have the result. So it's extremely, this technique is to develop over time and be called the a la poupée technique. But what Tyler does is he's most successful with landscapes and the use of 2 or 3 colors. But you can see in this example that some of those colors get muddy. Even though they're printed colors, they get muddy, they lose their detail. So it's a somewhat successful process. And this is on your left is a color printed portrait, and on your right is a portrait which has been hand colored. Now, in the Rosenwald Collection, we have a collection of Tyler's prints. There's 51 of them in the volume that we have. And there's 3 such sort of collections that have survived. So we're very lucky to have in the Rosenwald Collection 51 examples. But this is the first process of using a single plate, metal plate, with multiple colors to be printed. We're jumping back now to Newton. Newton in 1704 publishes his optics. And by 1722-23, there's a man by J.C. LeBlanc, who's in London at this time, who publishes this essay called Colorito. It's the harmony of coloring in painting. And what LeBlanc does is he said that there's 3 colors, and he creates a printing process using 3 and then later on 4 and 5 plates, so that he makes his engravings on the metal plates, and then he colors the plate, and then he does a second plate with another part of the image, and a third plate, as was done by the chiaroscuro printers with the woodblock. And this is an image from his publication, and here's another of his palette. And then here's a series of images of from Colorito, of his color printing. And that's the finished image. The flesh tones are really most difficult to be able to reproduce, and you want to believe what you're looking at, but nonetheless, it's one of the more difficult aspects of the application of color. Again, now we have the same issues as with the woodcut. There's registration issues, which are really difficult. So that you've got 3 plates, you've got 1 color on each plate. The plate goes through the press, the paper comes off, the same paper goes on the second plate, and so forth. So it's a very difficult process. And here's his mother and child from 1722, 3-color mezzotint. And these are just some of the tools. I just put this here, just some of the tools that the artist would use, or the engraver would use on his plate, so that you have a rocker over here, for instance, and these plates are rocked, which means that you create an abrasive onto the plate so that it will hold ink, and then the various engraving tools over on the right. In the 1738, a French artist and printer by the name of Gautier Deguchi, Jacques Fabien Gautier Deguchi, worked with LeBlanc in Paris for a short time. He left and began to set up his own shop. LeBlanc died in 1740, and in 1741, Gautier Deguchi applied for the privilege to print that LeBlanc had secured, and it then was transferred from LeBlanc to Gautier Deguchi. It was a 25-year privilege to print in this multiple plate process. Now, what Gautier Deguchi did in his first publication was he said, "I'm the inventor of this process." and completely denied LeBlanc's invention. And over time, people began to believe that Gautier Deguchi actually did invent this process. But Gautier Deguchi is a very interesting character. This is an image from his collection of plants. And this is color printed. It's a 4 color process of various plates, color application. And this is really you know, it's a really well done image. This is the image of the iris, and you can see how the background. When I was talking about the rocker and how the rocker works, if you look at the background, you can see what happens to the plate, so that it is able to hold. And there's the image of the iris. But what Gautier Deguchi is most well known for is his anatomical plates. And this is an example of the sort of naughty nature of Gautier Deguchi. He did a series of female anatomies. He did a series of plates on sex organs, human sex organs. He did a series of plates on venereal disease. And so, and he was doing this in a sense for the scientific community, but nonetheless his reputation was beginning to be questioned as a result of some of the choices that he was making in his work. But you can see the quality of the printing process and the color process here. I mean, that jumps off, and his reputation is almost sometimes obscured by his behavior during this period. Now we're moving to the last couple images, and this is an image by Carlo Lucani, who is an Italian color printer. And Lucani actually learned the process from Gautier Deguchi's son Edouard, who had moved to Italy. And Lucani is actually the person that has stimulated my interest in this whole color printing process. I got to know him through some books that we purchased of his engravings. He had about a 40-year career in Florence. He was a great antiquary, doing engravings of the historical sites of Florence and the Tuscan countryside, as well as of the objects and the paintings in the Uffizi gallery. He adopted the multi-plate process from Gautier Deguchi, and he did a series of 350 portraits of important Italians based on portraits that were in the Uffizi gallery, and we purchased this recently. It's quite small, actually. It's on the table over here. But perhaps his most important book is the Contadini della Toscana. And it's a series of 60 colored images, printed colored images. But by the time by 1796, he had determined that the cost and the difficulty of doing the triple plate process or the 4-plate process was so difficult and so expensive that he returned to the alla poupe method. And so he would print from a single plate. He would apply the color where he thought he wanted it, and then he would engrave his plate, and then he would apply the color, and then he would print it. So that this process was, again, it reverted all the way back to what Tyler was doing 100 years earlier. And I think this is a particularly fine copy of the book, and this is a copy that we've recently purchased for our collections. And that's the presentation I have for you today. And if you have questions? There's a lot lot to absorb. There's a lot to look at. There's a lot of missing data, as you can imagine, in a program like this. But we're particularly interested and I'm particularly pleased, as Mark had said, about the number of curators who are here today, because trying to understand what curatorial work is about, what we do as curators, what we do as conservators, how we handle the materials which we're responsible for, is such an important issue. And it's really sort of the motivating force behind the program that we want to do at the end of the year on authenticity. Is we want to highlight what curators around the country are doing on the subject of color, on the subject of paper making and paper analysis and understanding paper, on the subject of printing. And so this is an attempt in a short period of time to begin to think about how we can look at materials, how we can understand them better, and then how we can use that information so that other members of the curatorial and conservation and academic communities can communicate about how we understand the types of work that we do. So this is just the beginning. It's a feeble attempt, I admit, but nonetheless, it does have some, I think, it provides an opportunity to begin the dialogue and also to have a better understanding of the holdings in the Rare Book and Special Collections Division. So, thank you. So, any questions? Anybody? Any comments? Deborah?
The a la coupe method. So somebody would take this engraved plate and then apply the different colors, print it once, take the plate out again, and apply all the different colors, and print a second sheet. Is that how it would work?
No. The a la coupe method would be you take a single plate and you put all the colors on that plate.
That's what I said. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you have
But
one plate and you have all the different colors on that plate in
Right.
places where they're supposed to print.
Right.
So then you have one pass for the press.
That's right.
But the colors are all gone, right? And so you have to take the plate again.
Oh yes. Oh yeah.
Do you have a sense of how long it took to actually apply those colors?
That is a good question, but I've never printed a plate like that, so I don't really know. But I'm sure a solvent would have to be applied, and then, and this is one of the reasons I think Carlo Lucani was one of the last printers who were using these types of technique. Coming to the 19th century, it's a whole new world. And I didn't even want to go into the 19th century. It's so complicated, and I'm not qualified to speak to it. Maybe someday, but right now, it's just. But it was costly, and it was so time-consuming. Mark?
At least the later a la coupe plates seemed very much like they were color blocking. You know, there was the yellow over here and green over here. The earlier attempt seemed more painterly. Can you are there ways of spotting this? I mean, I guess my question when I'm looking at print is how do I arrive at the announcement that this is done a la coupe? Is there something?
Well, I mean, I think, like anything else, I think you really have to look at so many examples to be able to determine, have sort of the courage to be able to make, that kind of attribution. But with the a la coupe method, you're looking for some overlap of color. And not a registration issue as we might term it from what we talked about, but rather where the color is actually applied. So that's one method, and that's the method that I would use. But really, when you get into these later 18th century and into the 19th century, it becomes a lot more complicated because of the grounds that are used are different. There's stops that are used in order to, so things print in certain areas and don't print in other areas. I mean, that's not new, but it became a much more complicated process. Donald?
Going back to one of the first examples, you showed us a letter in blue and red, and you described as metal.
Yeah.
Would you elaborate
think it was the quality of the line that, and I must admit, my information comes from reading the experts that are doing this work, and the quality of that filigree that you saw around those initial letters was such a quality that it would be very difficult to duplicate that from a woodcut, just because of the line would have to be so. The line would be might break down. So the metal there, from what I understand, is that the consensus is that these were metal cuts done in 2 parts, and the movement to they were using woodcut initial letters in the early 1460s, so the movement came very quickly. But they were quite a bit blunter, and I think that the contour lines were not as well executed, not as thin as in the metal plate.
Well, block books were printed from wood,
That's right.
so you had simultaneous printing from wood and.
Well, it's not that it couldn't be done. It's not that it couldn't be done. I think what I'm looking at is the quality of the image that is printed. And so, yes, they could use the initial letters, certainly, in the woodcut format. But in these examples, it's really a metal. They're suggesting it's all a metal cut.
I'm curious if you have got a sense, or maybe some of the curators from P&P might have a sense, what the relationship between the print book community and the similar emerging print among artists community, where prints were a replacement for paintings. If they were working together or they were doing things kind of separately, and he brought in Cranach, who is, I know as an artist. And so I'm just curious if you have any sense of those communities being separate or working together.
We should credit Rainey's research here too, and also the wonderful Renaissance print book that by Peter Parshall. Those are both really fabulous resources for more information. But we know, at least with the chiaroscuro printing, that sometimes the same studios seem to have been centers for. Do you want to speak to this, Mr. Renaissance print?
Well, it's a hugely complicated question, but I think the important thing is that very quickly the two intersect, because in a certain sense the book-making people and the painters have been working together for a long time, and so it's kind of natural progression. But just in response to the earlier matter of metal, these are very hard calls. There's quite a bit of discussion about these letters and also workers, whether they were metal in the early cases. But if you recognize the fact that in the early period of printing, the people who are driving that are adept at typecasting and type printing, their medium is working finely with metal. And so it's a sort of natural thing that would occur in addition to the fact that it's printed longevity for, bearing up under the pressure of the rest. And so it just seems very likely that for these initial attempts, but particularly on small scales, not larger, they weren't making large relief prints, for example. They were doing very fine, exquisite initials, which, as Dan explained, quickly became too much trouble.
Somewhat related to the who's printing what. When you're talking about the atlases, it reminded me immediately of read a special map in the geography map division, and I can't remember at the moment who did it, but it is often cited as the first colored print map, and it's Strasbourg, and which is how I know it, of course. But I was wondering, is this the same print?
It's the same. It's by Johann
It is.
Schaefer. Yeah.
Okay, so they would do the maps as well. It's not as separate as the artist and the printers. Right.
Yeah.
Dan, you were talking about how laborious this process is and how long and time consuming it would be to do one of these books. How many books would they turn out of a subject? Do you have any idea?
Well, what period are you? The earliest books? Well, there's a whole discussion that's taking place on the rare book listserv right now about editions from the 15th century. And there's Eric White, who's at Bridwell, is doing a lot of work on identifying editions and the numbers that they were, he's got a list now of 275 books that are printed where he knows through documentation how many copies were printed. So in a general term, the numbers run, for, not pamphlet, but for a substantial book, from, at least in his research so far that he's able to document, from about 175 copies to about 365 copies. So somewhere in that range. And this is the earliest period. And that's an area of research that before we used to be able to just say, well, they did a couple hundred copies. They did a couple hundred copies. Because no one knew anything. You could just say just about anything you wanted. But now...
Now we know we're right.
See, but now, you know, there's actually some research being done to be able to try and bring that type of information together, because there's been so much speculation over time.
Just to follow up on that, this was a very complicated economic problem, because when you put together a book, it tied up all of your type, and paper was the biggest expense. And so you didn't print what you couldn't sell. And so the cash flow issue was a constant factor in how people had to calculate how much they could move, as it were, in relationship to how long they could sit with their type unusable, so to speak. Anyway.
Well, I just wondered if the books would have been commissioned in advance.
Some were commissioned through patronage, local patronage, and some were authors would have get a printer to print a book. But there's a whole history of that. So, and it's a complex history as well. This whole period is pretty difficult to understand at the time.
Another question.
Yeah.
You showed an image of some of the printer's tools.
Yes.
So I was wondering whether all of the methodology that they know about printing, is that from guides that were done at the time?
So there's a number of, I mean, one of the things about studying the printed book is that you really have the object to study. So it's, and you can bibliographers have been analyzing how type was applied, how composition was done, the imposition of the type to the press. There's been so much study on these various aspects of how a book is printed that you could pick just about any one of them, and it's a world of specialty. So it's and the guy sitting next to you is one of them who studies from the Folgers. Jorn studies so much about the whole printing process from the 17th century. So he must have got the bio. That's it. Thank you very much.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.